You are born in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean, 2 miles beneath the surface where sunlight has never touched. The water pressure here would flatten a human instantly, but for you, it feels like home. Your mother's massive body shields you as you take your first breath, not of air, but of the frigid seawater that will fill your lungs for the next hour. You are a sperm whale calf, and you have just entered the most unforgiving environment on Earth. At birth, you are already 13 feet long and weigh over a ton, but compared to your mother's 60-foot frame, you are tiny and helpless. She hovers beneath you, her enormous bulk rising like a living mountain, pushing you toward the surface with gentle nudges from her massive head. You don't understand what is happening, but your instincts tell you to follow her lead. Your flippers work frantically, trying to keep pace, but the distance to the surface feels impossible. The ascent takes forever. Your lungs burn as the water around you grows lighter, and strange sensations ripple through your body as the pressure decreases. Then suddenly, you break through. The surface of the ocean explodes around you as your head emerges into a world you have never experienced, a world of air and light and endless sky. You gasp, filling your lungs with oxygen for the first time, and the relief is overwhelming. Your mother surfaces beside you, her massive form creating waves that rock your small body. She breathes deeply through the blowhole on top of her head, sending a column of mist 20 feet into the air. You try to mimic her, but your first attempt sends you into a coughing fit that leaves you dizzy and confused. She watches patiently, her dark eye, larger than your entire head, fixed on you with an intensity that feels both protective and assessing. Within minutes, she begins to descend again, and you follow. This is your first lesson. The surface is temporary. The deep is where you belong. As you dive, the light fades quickly, and soon you are back in the familiar darkness. But now, you understand something you didn't before. There is another world above, a world you will visit, but never call home. The pod is waiting when you return. 15 other females, all massive, all watching as your mother brings you into their circle. They communicate in clicks and whistles that vibrate through your body, sounds so complex and layered that they feel like music. You don't understand the language yet, but you can sense the meaning: curiosity, approval, welcome. One of the females approaches, her scarred hide telling stories of battles you cannot imagine. She examines you with gentle touches from her massive flippers, and you instinctively press closer to your mother's side. Food becomes your obsession within hours. Your mother's milk is rich and thick, almost like cream, and you need gallons of it every day just to survive. She positions herself vertically in the water, allowing you to nurse from mammary slits along her belly. The milk is so dense with fat that it leaves an oily film in the water around you, attracting curious fish that dart away when you move too quickly. But feeding is dangerous. Every time you nurse, both you and your mother are vulnerable. She cannot hunt while you feed, and you cannot dive deep enough to escape if predators arrive. The other females form a protective circle around you both, their massive bodies creating a living fortress. Their sonar clicks intensify, scanning the darkness for threats that could end your life before it has truly begun. The first threat comes within days. A pod of killer whales appears in the distance, their distinctive black and white patterns cutting through the blue like living torpedoes. They are smaller than the adults in your pod, but they are fast, coordinated, and deadly. Your mother's body tenses, and the entire pod shifts formation. The females position themselves between you and the orcas, their massive heads facing outward like the shields of an ancient army. The killer whales circle, testing the pod's defenses. They know they cannot take down a full-grown sperm whale, but a calf is different. A calf is a prize worth risking everything for. One of them breaks from the group, charging directly at the defensive line. The largest female in your pod meets the attack head-on, her 60-ton body slamming into the orca with a force that sends shockwaves through the water. The killer whale tumbles backward, stunned but not defeated. The battle is brief but terrifying. The orcas probe for weaknesses, darting in and out of the formation, but the sperm whales hold firm. Their massive heads swing like battering rams, and their powerful tails create currents that knock the smaller predators off course. Eventually, the killer whales retreat, but not before one of them manages to rake its teeth across the flank of a younger female. Blood clouds the water, and you taste metal and fear. Your mother nudges you deeper into the center of the pod, and you realize this is your life now. Constant vigilance, constant danger, constant protection. You are the future of the pod, but you are also its greatest vulnerability. Every decision the adults make revolves around keeping you alive. As weeks pass, you grow stronger and more confident. Your dives last longer, and you can descend several hundred feet before your lungs force you back to the surface. The other calves in the pod become your companions and rivals. There are 3 others, all born within months of you, and together you form a small school within the larger group. Play becomes learning, and learning becomes survival. You chase each other through the dark water, practicing the quick turns and sudden stops that might one day save your life. The adults watch these games with patient attention, occasionally intervening when play becomes too rough or when you venture too far from the group. Your mother begins teaching you the language of clicks and whistles that holds the pod together. Each sound has meaning: danger, food, follow, stay, come. But beneath the simple commands is a deeper layer of communication, a complex symphony of information that tells stories, shares memories, and binds the pod together across generations. You struggle to understand it at first, your own attempts at communication sounding clumsy and unclear compared to the elegant precision of the adults. But slowly, you begin to grasp the basics. A sharp click means attention. A long whistle calls for gathering. A rapid series of pulses indicates excitement or alarm. And beneath it all, running like an undercurrent through every conversation, is the constant stream of echolocation, the biological sonar that allows your kind to see in the absolute darkness of the deep ocean. Learning to echolocate is like learning to see. At first, the world is a confusing mess of returning echoes, sounds bouncing off everything around you in a chaotic jumble that makes no sense. But gradually, patterns emerge. The sharp return from a rock face, the soft absorption of a school of fish, the hollow echo of a cave entrance. Your brain begins to construct images from sound, building a 3-dimensional map of your environment that is more detailed and accurate than any human vision. Your first successful hunt happens by accident. A small squid, no bigger than your flipper, drifts too close while you are practicing your echolocation. Your sonar locks onto it, and suddenly you can see it with perfect clarity. Its soft body, its trailing tentacles, the rapid beating of its small heart. Instinct takes over. Your jaws snap forward, and the squid disappears in a single gulp. The satisfaction is immediate and overwhelming. This is what you were born for, not just to survive, but to hunt. The other calves gather around you, clicking excitedly, and even some of the adults acknowledge your success with approving whistles. Your mother nudges you gently, and you sense pride in her touch. But real hunting is still years away. For now, you remain dependent on her milk, following her on shallow practice dives while she searches for the giant squid that form the core of every sperm whale's diet. You watch her disappear into the abyss, diving deeper than you can imagine, staying down for over an hour while she battles creatures the size of school buses in the crushing darkness 2 miles below. When she returns, she is often scarred and exhausted, her hide marked with circular wounds from squid tentacles lined with hooks the size of dinner plates. Sometimes she brings back pieces of her prey, sharing the bounty with the pod, and you taste your first squid meat, rubbery, salty, and somehow deeply satisfying in a way that tells you this is your true food, your evolutionary destiny. The ocean reveals its dangers slowly. Sharks patrol the edges of your world, their sleek forms cutting through the water with predatory grace. Most give the pod a wide berth. Even a great white shark knows better than to challenge a group of sperm whales. But you learn to recognize their silhouettes and the particular way they move when they are hunting versus when they are simply passing through. Worse than sharks are the ships. The first time you encounter one, the sound nearly drives you mad. The massive engines create a wall of noise that drowns out everything else, making communication impossible and echolocation useless. The pod scatters in confusion, and you find yourself separated from your mother for terrifying minutes until her desperate calls finally penetrate the mechanical roar. The ship passes overhead like a moving mountain, its propellers churning the water into a foam of bubbles and chaos. You learn that these floating monsters appear without warning, bringing with them a deafening cacophony that can be heard for hundreds of miles underwater. Some of the older females bear scars from encounters with ship propellers, long white lines across their dark hides that tell stories of near-death experiences. But perhaps the most insidious danger is one you cannot see or hear or taste. The water itself is changing. Chemicals seep down from the surface world, invisible poisons that accumulate in the fat of the fish you will one day eat. The ocean is becoming more acidic, making it harder for the small creatures at the bottom of the food chain to build their shells and skeletons. The temperature is rising, driving prey species into deeper, colder waters and disrupting migration patterns that have remained stable for millions of years. You are too young to understand these changes, but the adults sense them. Their behavior becomes more cautious, their movements more deliberate. They spend longer at the surface, as if trying to read signs in the sky that might explain what is happening to their world. The songs they sing to each other take on new notes, frequencies you have never heard before, carrying messages that seem heavy with concern and confusion. Your first birthday passes unmarked except by your own growth. You are now 20 feet long and weigh 3 tons, still tiny compared to the adults, but no longer the helpless infant who struggled to reach the surface. Your echolocation has improved dramatically, and you can now detect objects the size of a baseball from over a mile away. Your vocabulary has expanded to include dozens of different calls, and you are beginning to understand the complex social dynamics that govern pod life. The pod is not just a family, it is a civilization. Each whale has a role, a position in the hierarchy that determines everything from feeding order to mating rights to decision-making authority. Your mother holds a high rank, earned through years of successful hunting and the respect of her peers. This status protects you, but it also creates expectations. You are watched more closely than the other calves, your progress monitored and evaluated by whales whose judgment will determine your future place in the pod. Seasonal migrations begin to shape your understanding of the world. The pod follows ancient routes between feeding grounds and breeding areas, journeys that can span thousands of miles and take months to complete. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate a move is coming, changes in water temperature, shifts in current patterns, the behavior of the fish and squid that form your ecosystem. These migrations are epic undertakings that test every member of the pod. The adults must balance their need to hunt with the demands of travel, often going days without food, while maintaining the steady pace necessary to reach distant waters before seasonal changes make the journey impossible. You and the other calves struggle to keep up, your smaller size making every mile a challenge. But the migrations also reveal the true scale of your world. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, its depths hiding wonders and terrors beyond imagination. You pass over underwater mountains, taller than anything on land, their peaks rising to within a few hundred feet of the surface before plunging back into abyssal darkness. You cross trenches so deep that no light has ever touched their floors, their sides dropping away into blackness so complete it seems to swallow sound itself. During these journeys, you encounter other pods for the first time. The meetings are tense affairs, filled with complex social negotiations that you barely understand. The matriarchs of each group approach each other cautiously, their massive heads almost touching as they exchange information through intricate patterns of clicks and whistles. You stay close to your mother's side, watching as she participates in conversations that seem to cover everything from hunting conditions to territorial boundaries to the health of various family lines. Some encounters are friendly reunions between pods that have traveled together before. The whales greet each other with enthusiastic calls, and the calves are allowed to play together while the adults share information about feeding grounds and migration routes. You make your first friends outside your immediate family during these meetings, forming bonds with young whales who may become your companions for decades to come. Other encounters are more hostile. Territorial disputes can escalate quickly when two pods claim the same feeding area, and you witness your first real battle between sperm whales. The matriarchs charge each other with terrifying force, their massive heads colliding with impacts that send shockwaves through the water for miles. The sound is like thunder, and you feel the vibrations in your bones as 60-ton bodies slam together again and again. The fights are brief but devastating. One well-placed blow from a sperm whale's head can crush bones and rupture organs, and both sides know that escalation could lead to deaths that neither pod can afford. Usually one group backs down before serious injuries occur, but you see enough violence to understand that your peaceful pod life exists within a larger world where strength and territory matter more than kinship. As you grow larger and stronger, your diving abilities improve dramatically. Your first deep dive takes you down 800 feet, far enough that the pressure begins to compress your rib cage and collapse your lungs. The sensation is terrifying at first. Your body seems to be crushing itself from the inside, but your mother's steady presence beside you provides reassurance. "This is normal," she seems to say through gentle touches and encouraging clicks. "This is what you were built for." The deeper you go, the stranger the world becomes. Bioluminescent creatures drift past like living stars, their bodies glowing with cold fire that illuminates the darkness in brief, ghostly flashes. Giant jellyfish pulse through the water column like alien spacecraft, their translucent bells expanding and contracting in hypnotic rhythms. Schools of lanternfish create moving constellations, their synchronized swimming patterns creating light shows that rival anything on the surface. But it's the squid that capture your attention most completely. These are not the small creatures you practiced on near the surface. These are monsters from the deep, some with bodies longer than your own and tentacles that could wrap around a school bus. They move with fluid grace through the crushing darkness, their intelligence evident in the way they hunt and communicate and adapt to threats. Your first encounter with a giant squid happens during a hunting lesson with your mother. She has been teaching you to use your sonar more effectively, showing you how to distinguish between different types of prey and how to track moving targets through the chaotic acoustic environment of the deep ocean. The squid appears on your sonar as a massive, complex shape, its tentacles creating a shifting pattern of echoes that initially confuses your interpretation. Your mother tenses beside you, her own echolocation intensifying as she locks onto the target. The squid has noticed them too. Its chromatophores flash in rapid sequences of color and pattern, a visual language that speaks of alarm and aggression. The creature is easily 30 feet long, its body thick with muscle, and its tentacles armed with hooks that can tear through whale hide like razors. The hunt that follows is a masterclass in underwater predation. Your mother approaches from below, using the squid's own bioluminescence to mask her approach. The creature tries to escape, jetting backward through the water with powerful contractions of its mantle, but your mother anticipates the movement. Her massive jaws snap shut around the squid's head, crushing the creature's brain in an instant. But the squid doesn't die quietly. Its tentacles wrap around your mother's head and jaw, the hooks tearing deep gouges in her flesh as the creature's death throes threaten to drag them both deeper into the abyss. Blood clouds the water, and you taste the metallic tang of your mother's injuries, mixed with the alien flavor of squid ink. Your mother thrashes violently, using her superior size and strength to tear free from the dying squid's embrace. When she finally surfaces with her prize, her head is covered in circular wounds that will leave permanent scars, but she has food, enough protein-rich squid meat to sustain herself and continue producing the milk you still depend on for survival. You watch her eat with fascination and growing hunger. The squid meat looks nothing like the fish you occasionally sample. It's pale and rubbery, with a texture that seems almost alien. But the smell triggers something deep in your brain, an ancestral memory that tells you this is your true prey, the food your species has hunted for millions of years. Your mother tears off a small piece and offers it to you. Your first taste of giant squid is overwhelming. The meat is dense and chewy, with a flavor that is both familiar and completely foreign. It's saltier than fish, with an almost metallic aftertaste that lingers in your mouth long after you swallow. But there's something deeply satisfying about it, as if your body recognizes this as the fuel it was designed to process. The feeding attracts attention from other members of the pod. Giant squid are rare prizes, and the successful hunter is expected to share with the group according to complex social rules you are only beginning to understand. Your mother distributes portions based on rank and need, ensuring that pregnant females and nursing mothers receive priority while younger, stronger whales wait their turn. You notice that your mother keeps the choicest pieces, the thick mantle meat and the protein-rich tentacles, for herself and the other senior females. The younger whales receive smaller portions, mostly scraps and less desirable parts. It's your first real lesson in pod hierarchy, a demonstration that status in sperm whale society is earned through hunting success and maintained through careful resource management. As autumn approaches, the pod's behavior begins to change in subtle ways. The adults spend more time at the surface, their calls becoming longer and more complex. You sense anticipation in their movements, a restless energy that suggests major changes ahead. Your mother's milk production increases, and she feeds you more frequently, as if building up your strength for some coming challenge. The reason becomes clear when the first males arrive. You have never seen adult male sperm whales before. Your pod consists entirely of females and young, but their appearance is unmistakable. They are massive beyond anything you could have imagined, some reaching lengths of over 70 feet and weights that dwarf even the largest females in your group. These are not the gentle giants you know from your pod. The males are scarred warriors, their hides crisscrossed with white lines that tell stories of battles fought in the deep ocean. Their heads are proportionally larger than the females, designed for the ramming attacks they use to establish dominance during mating season. When they call, their voices are so deep and powerful that you feel them as much as hear them, bass notes that seem to emanate from the very bones of the earth. The largest male approaches your pod with confident strokes, his massive bulk cutting through the water like a living submarine. The females gather in a defensive formation, but this is not the hostile reaction they show to killer whales or rival pods. There is recognition here and acceptance, though tinged with wariness. Your mother positions herself between you and the approaching male, her body language tense but not aggressive. The male's echolocation sweeps over the pod, examining each individual with the thoroughness of a customs inspector. When his sonar reaches you, you feel exposed and vulnerable, as if those sound waves are stripping away every secret your young body might hold. The male's attention focuses on the adult females, particularly those who are not currently nursing calves. His calls become more complex, incorporating frequency patterns you have never heard before. The females respond with their own vocalizations, and you realize you are witnessing a conversation conducted in a dialect reserved for adults, a language of courtship and negotiation that excludes juveniles like yourself. Over the following days, more males arrive. Some are welcomed by the pod, while others are driven off by the combined efforts of the females and the males who have already been accepted. You watch these confrontations with growing understanding. The pod is not passive in this process. The females are choosing their mates based on criteria that include size, health, scars that indicate successful battles, and complex behavioral displays that demonstrate fitness and genetic quality. The mating season brings change to your daily routine. The pod moves more slowly, spending longer periods at the surface, while the adults engage in elaborate courtship rituals. You and the other calves are pushed to the periphery of these activities, watched over by a few designated females, while the rest of the pod focuses on reproduction. Your education continues even during this chaotic time. One of your caretakers, an older female whose own calf died years ago, takes special interest in your development. She teaches you advanced echolocation techniques, showing you how to use your sonar to map complex three-dimensional spaces and track multiple targets simultaneously. Under her guidance, you learn to distinguish between different species of deep-sea creatures based solely on their acoustic signatures. Each type of fish, squid, and crustacean reflects sound waves in characteristic patterns, creating unique sonic fingerprints that an experienced whale can read like a field guide. A school of lanternfish sounds different from a group of hatchetfish, which sounds different from a cluster of vampire squid. More importantly, you learn to identify threats through sound alone. The steady pulse of a ship's engine, the irregular heartbeat that indicates a predator under stress, the particular frequency signature of military sonar that can damage your hearing or even kill you if you're too close when it activates. This last lesson proves crucial when a naval vessel appears on the horizon, its experimental sonar system sending pulses through the water that are far more powerful than anything you have experienced. The sound hits your pod like a physical blow, causing immediate disorientation and pain. Several whales begin swimming erratically, their natural navigation systems disrupted by the acoustic assault. Your caretaker reacts instantly, gathering you and the other calves and leading you away from the source of the sound. Her own distress is obvious. She keeps shaking her head as if trying to clear her hearing, and her echolocation clicks are weak and irregular. But she maintains her protective formation around the young whales, guiding you to deeper water where the sonar pulses are somewhat muted by distance and pressure. The naval exercise lasts for hours, during which your pod remains scattered and confused. Some of the adults suffer permanent hearing damage, their ability to echolocate reduced to a fraction of its former precision. One elderly female, already weakened by age, dies from the stress and disorientation, her body sinking into the abyss while her podmates sing mournful songs that carry for hundreds of miles through the deep ocean. When the naval vessel finally disappears beyond the horizon, your pod slowly begins to regroup. The reunion is subdued, marked by gentle touches and quiet vocalizations as the survivors assess the damage. Your mother finds you among the scattered whales, her relief evident in the way she presses her massive head against your smaller body. But something has changed. The easy confidence that once characterized your pod's movements is gone, replaced by a nervous vigilance that will never fully fade. The incident marks the beginning of your understanding that the ocean is no longer the sanctuary it once was for your kind. The surface world has reached down into your domain with technologies that turn sound itself into a weapon. Your caretaker's damaged hearing serves as a constant reminder of this new reality, her once precise echolocation now reduced to crude approximations that make hunting difficult and navigation treacherous. As winter deepens, the mating season concludes and the massive males begin to depart. They leave as suddenly as they arrived, disappearing into the vastness of the ocean to resume their solitary lives. The pod settles back into its familiar rhythms, but you notice that several of the adult females are behaving differently. They eat less, move more carefully, and spend longer periods resting at the surface. You don't understand yet that new life is growing within them, that your pod will welcome new calves in the coming year. Your own growth continues at a remarkable pace. By your second winter, you are 30 feet long and weigh nearly 10 tons. Your echolocation has become sophisticated enough to detect objects the size of a marble from over 2 miles away, and you can dive to depths of 1,500 feet without discomfort. Your lungs have adapted to compress and expand with the changing pressure, and your blood chemistry has evolved to store oxygen with an efficiency that would be impossible for any surface-dwelling mammal. The deep ocean has become your playground and your classroom. You spend hours exploring underwater canyons and seamounts, using your sonar to map their contours and discover the creatures that inhabit their crevices. Each dive reveals new wonders, fields of tube worms clustered around volcanic vents, their feathery plumes filtering nutrients from the superheated water. Colonies of glass sponges that look like underwater forests made of crystal. Deep-sea corals that glow with their own inner light, creating gardens of beauty in the perpetual darkness. But it's during these solo explorations that you encounter your first truly dangerous predator as a near adult. The colossal squid appears without warning, rising from a trench so deep that your sonar cannot find its bottom. This creature dwarfs even the giant squid your mother hunts. Its body is easily 40 feet long, with tentacles that stretch another 30 feet beyond that. Unlike its smaller cousins, this monster is built for war, its tentacles armed not just with hooks, but with rotating clubs that can deliver bone-crushing blows. The squid's eyes are the largest in the animal kingdom, each one bigger than your head, and they track your movements with an intelligence that sends chills through your blood. This is not prey. This is a competitor, an apex predator that considers sperm whales not as hunters, but as potential meals. The creature's chromatophores flash in patterns of red and white, a visual language that needs no translation. It's sizing you up, calculating whether you're worth the effort of a fight. Your training takes over. You position yourself vertically in the water, presenting the smallest possible target while keeping your massive head pointed toward the threat. Your sonar pulses intensify, creating a three-dimensional map of the creature that reveals every detail of its anatomy. The squid's mantle contracts rhythmically, ready to propel it forward with devastating speed. Its tentacles spread wide, creating a net of death that could ensnare you before you have time to react. The attack comes without warning. The squid jets forward with explosive force, its tentacles reaching for your head and jaw. But you're ready. Your own charge meets the creature head-on, your reinforced skull slamming into its soft mantle with the force of a battering ram. The impact sends shockwaves through both your bodies, but your bone structure is designed for exactly this kind of collision, while the squid's is not. The creature recoils, stunned but far from defeated. Its tentacles wrap around your head, and you feel the hooks tearing into your flesh. Pain explodes across your senses as the squid's clubs hammer against your skull, each blow delivered with enough force to crack concrete. Blood clouds the water around you, and you taste the metallic tang of your own injuries mixing with the alien flavor of squid ink. But you have advantages the squid lacks. Your jaw muscles are among the most powerful in the animal kingdom, capable of generating bite forces that exceed those of any dinosaur. When your teeth close around one of the creature's tentacles, the result is immediate and devastating. The limb separates from the squid's body in a cloud of tissue and fluid, and the creature's pain response is so violent that it nearly tears itself apart trying to escape. The battle continues for what feels like hours but probably lasts only minutes. You and the squid roll through the water column, locked in a death spiral that carries you deeper into the abyss. Your lungs burn as your oxygen reserves dwindle, but the squid is suffering too. Its movements become increasingly erratic as blood loss weakens its responses and damages its nervous system. The end comes suddenly. Your jaws find the creature's head, crushing the complex brain that had made it such a formidable opponent. The squid's tentacles release their grip, its body going limp as neural activity ceases. You surface with your prize, gasping great lungfuls of air while your wounds sting in the salt water. The victory is yours, but the cost is severe. Deep lacerations cover your head and shoulders, and several of your teeth have been broken or torn out during the fight. The scars will remain with you for the rest of your life, permanent reminders of the day you proved yourself as a hunter capable of taking on the ocean's most dangerous predators. Your return to the pod creates a sensation. The other whales examine your wounds with careful sonar scans, their clicks and whistles carrying notes of surprise and approval. You have accomplished something that many adult whales never manage. You have defeated a colossal squid in single combat. Your status within the pod shifts immediately. You are no longer viewed as a large juvenile, but as a young adult who has earned respect through battle. Your mother's pride is evident in the way she positions herself beside you during the feeding that follows. The squid meat is distributed according to strict protocol, but as the successful hunter, you receive the choicest portions. The rich protein will fuel your continued growth and help your wounds heal, but more importantly, the act of sharing your kill cements your new position in the pod's hierarchy. The seasons continue their ancient cycle, and you find yourself taking on increasing responsibilities within the group. You participate in hunting expeditions with the adult females, learning the complex teamwork required to corner schools of fish or coordinate attacks on large squid. Your role is still subordinate. You follow rather than lead, but your contributions are valued and your opinions carry weight during the decision-making process that governs pod movements. Your third year brings new challenges as climate change begins to affect the ocean in ways that are impossible to ignore. The water temperature rises by degrees that seem small but have enormous impacts on the ecosystem. The krill populations that form the base of the food web shift their distribution patterns, moving into deeper, colder waters or migrating to entirely different regions. The fish and squid that depend on krill follow these movements, creating cascading changes that ripple up through every level of marine life. Your pod adapts by expanding its hunting range and diversifying its diet. Traditional feeding grounds that have sustained sperm whales for generations become barren, forcing the group to travel farther and work harder for each meal. The stress affects everyone, but it's particularly hard on the oldest females, whose years of accumulated toxins and microplastics have compromised their immune systems and reduced their hunting efficiency. One of these elders is your original caretaker, the female who taught you advanced echolocation after your mother. Her hearing, already damaged by the naval sonar incident, continues to deteriorate. Her echolocation becomes increasingly unreliable, making it difficult for her to navigate or locate prey. She begins to lag behind during migrations, forcing the pod to slow its pace or risk leaving her behind. The decision of what to do creates the first serious conflict you witness within the pod's leadership. Some of the younger females argue for maintaining the group's mobility, pointing out that the changing ocean conditions require rapid adaptation to new feeding areas. Others, led by your mother, insist that abandoning a pod member violates the fundamental bonds that hold sperm whale society together. The debate is conducted in the complex language of adult whales, with arguments presented through intricate patterns of clicks, whistles, and body language. You understand enough to follow the general discussion, but the nuances escape you. What becomes clear is that this is not just about one individual whale. It's about the kind of society your pod wants to be in an increasingly challenging world. The resolution comes when your caretaker makes the choice herself. During a rest period at the surface, she simply swims away from the group. Her farewell song is brief but haunting, a melody that speaks of acceptance, gratitude, and release. The pod responds with their own vocalizations, a chorus of farewell that carries for miles through the deep water. You never see her again, but her songs continue to reach the pod for several days as she travels alone into the vast ocean. Eventually, even these fade into silence, leaving only memories and the lessons she imparted. Her sacrifice teaches you that leadership sometimes means making impossible choices, and that the survival of the group must sometimes take precedence over the needs of individuals. The loss affects your mother deeply. She had known your caretaker since their own youth, and their friendship spanned decades of shared hunts, migrations, and dangers. For weeks after the separation, your mother's behavior changes. She becomes more protective of you and the other young whales, as if trying to compensate for the loss by intensifying her care for those who remain. This protective instinct proves crucial when the pod encounters a new threat that none of the adults have seen before. It begins as a change in the water's taste and smell, subtle chemical signatures that trigger alarm responses in whales who have learned to be wary of anything unusual. The source becomes apparent when you surface for air and find the ocean covered with a thin film of oil that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The oil spill is the result of a deep water drilling accident hundreds of miles away, but the currents have carried the contamination into your pod's territory. The substance coats everything it touches, making breathing difficult and turning the act of surfacing into a toxic ordeal. Worse, the oil is working its way down through the water column, poisoning the fish and squid that form your food web. Your pod faces an impossible choice: remain in familiar waters that are becoming increasingly poisoned, or migrate to unknown areas where food sources and territorial boundaries are uncertain. The decision-making process is complicated by the fact that several females are pregnant and cannot undertake long-distance travel without risking their unborn calves. The compromise solution reveals the sophisticated nature of sperm whale society. The pod splits temporarily, with the pregnant females and their escorts remaining in the least contaminated areas while the others scout for new territory. You accompany the scouting group, your youth and stamina making you valuable for the long-distance reconnaissance missions required to map potential new feeding grounds. The search takes you farther from home than you have ever traveled, into waters where the acoustic landscape is dominated by unfamiliar sounds and the prey species follow different behavioral patterns. Your group encounters other pods during this journey, some friendly and others hostile. The negotiations required to secure temporary hunting rights in occupied territories are complex and sometimes break down into violent confrontations. During one such encounter, you witness your first battle between adult females from different pods. The fight begins as a dispute over access to a particularly rich feeding area where bioluminescent squid gather in dense concentrations. Both groups claim ancestral rights to the territory, and neither is willing to back down. The battle is unlike anything you experienced during mating season. These are not ritualized displays of dominance, but genuine combat between groups fighting for survival. The matriarchs charge each other with devastating force, their massive heads colliding with impacts that can be felt for miles. Younger females join the fray, using their superior speed and agility to harass the enemy's flanks while avoiding direct confrontation with the larger opponents. You find yourself swept up in the violence despite your inexperience. An enemy female, scarred and battle-hardened, singles you out as a vulnerable target. Her attack is swift and brutal, designed to eliminate a future threat to her own pod's interests. Your defensive training takes over as you dodge her initial charge and counter with a ramming attack of your own. The collision sends shockwaves through both your bodies, but your younger bones absorb the impact better than her aging skeleton. She staggers, giving you the opening you need to press your advantage. Your second attack catches her off guard, and she retreats with injuries that will take weeks to heal. The battle ends when both sides realize that the cost of continued fighting outweighs any potential benefits. The territory is divided through a complex negotiation process that establishes boundaries and schedules for shared use. Your pod secures access to the feeding grounds for certain hours of the day, while the resident group maintains priority during peak hunting times. The agreement holds for several weeks, long enough for your scouts to locate alternative feeding areas that can support the entire pod. The reunion with the pregnant females is emotional, marked by extended greeting ceremonies and the sharing of information about conditions in both territories. 2 new calves have been born during the separation, bringing fresh hope to a pod that has endured significant losses over the past year. Your role in the scouting mission and the territorial battle has elevated your status once again. You are now recognized as a full adult member of the pod, with voting rights in the collective decisions that govern group behavior. The responsibility is both thrilling and terrifying. Your choices will now affect not just your own survival, but the welfare of the entire family unit. As your 4th year begins, you start to understand that adulthood in sperm whale society is not just about size or hunting ability, but about the complex web of relationships and obligations that bind the pod together. You have learned to read the subtle social cues that indicate shifting alliances, brewing conflicts, and opportunities for advancement within the group's hierarchy. The ocean continues to change around you, presenting new challenges that require constant adaptation. Shipping traffic increases, bringing more noise pollution and the ever-present danger of collisions with vessels whose operators cannot hear or see whales in time to avoid them. Military activities expand into previously pristine areas, bringing sonar systems that can kill or permanently disable any whale unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But perhaps the most insidious change is the gradual alteration of the ocean's chemistry itself. The water becomes more acidic as atmospheric carbon dioxide dissolves into the sea, making it harder for shell-building organisms to survive. The change cascade up through the food web, affecting everything from the tiniest zooplankton to the largest predators. Your pod adapts by becoming more nomadic, following food sources across greater distances and spending less time in any single area. The migrations become more frequent and more arduous, testing the endurance of every member. The oldest whales struggle to keep pace, while the youngest are pushed to their physical limits by the constant travel. During one of these extended migrations, your pod encounters something that changes your understanding of your species' place in the world. It begins as a faint acoustic signature on the edge of your sonar range, a pattern of clicks and whistles that sounds almost like whale song, but contains frequencies and rhythms that are completely unfamiliar. As you approach the source, the truth becomes apparent. It's another sperm whale pod, but their vocalizations are in a dialect you have never heard before. These whales are refugees from a part of the ocean that has become uninhabitable due to pollution, overfishing, and acoustic disturbance. They have traveled thousands of miles to reach waters that can still support life, and their songs tell stories of losses and hardships that make your own pod's struggles seem minor in comparison. The meeting between the two groups is tense at first. Your pod's resources are already stretched thin, and the addition of more mouths to feed could threaten everyone's survival. But the refugees bring valuable information about conditions in distant waters, knowledge that could help both groups find better feeding areas and avoid the worst effects of human activity. After days of negotiation, a temporary alliance is formed. The two pods will travel together for a limited time, sharing information and coordinating hunts while maintaining separate social structures. It's a fragile arrangement that requires constant diplomatic management, but it offers advantages that neither group could achieve alone. The combined pod is now large enough to take on prey that would be impossible for smaller groups to handle. Working together, you successfully hunt a school of giant squid that provides food for weeks. The cooperative effort also allows for more sophisticated defensive strategies when predators threaten the group, but the alliance also creates new tensions and competitions that test your developing leadership skills. Resources must be shared fairly between the two groups. Hunting territories must be negotiated, and conflicts between individuals from different pods must be mediated before they escalate into broader disputes. You find yourself serving as an intermediary between the groups, your youth and relative neutrality making you acceptable to both sides. The role teaches you valuable lessons about diplomacy and conflict resolution that will serve you well in the years to come. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate brewing trouble and to intervene before minor disagreements become major confrontations. The temporary alliance lasts for nearly 6 months before circumstances force the groups to separate. Food becomes scarce in the region, and the combined pod is too large to sustain itself in the available territory. The parting is amicable, with both groups having benefited from the cooperation, but it leaves you with a deeper understanding of the challenges facing your entire species. As you continue to mature, your body undergoes changes that mark your transition from adolescence to full adulthood. Your head grows proportionally larger, developing the massive frontal structure that will become your primary weapon in future battles. Your teeth become thicker and stronger, capable of crushing the shells and bones of the largest prey. Your diving abilities continue to improve, and you can now descend to depths of over 3,000 feet and remain submerged for nearly 2 hours. But the most significant changes are in your brain and nervous system. Your echolocation becomes incredibly sophisticated, capable of creating detailed three-dimensional images of your environment that surpass the resolution of any human technology. You can now distinguish between different species of fish based solely on their swim bladder signatures, track multiple moving targets simultaneously, and even detect the emotional states of other whales through subtle variations in their acoustic output. Your understanding of the pod's complex social dynamics deepens as well. You begin to recognize the subtle power struggles that occur beneath the surface of apparently harmonious relationships. Alliances form and dissolve based on changing circumstances, and your own position within the hierarchy continues to evolve as you prove yourself in various challenges and conflicts. The ocean around you continues its relentless transformation, presenting new obstacles that test every survival skill you have learned. But you are no longer the helpless calf who struggled to reach the surface during those first terrifying moments of life. You are a mature sperm whale, equipped with the intelligence, strength, and social skills necessary to thrive in an increasingly hostile world. Your story is far from over, but you have survived the most dangerous period of your life and established yourself as a valued member of your pod's society. The challenges ahead will be different, perhaps even more difficult, but you face them with the confidence that comes from having already overcome seemingly impossible odds. The deep ocean calls to you with its ancient mysteries and endless possibilities, and you answer that call with the knowledge that you are perfectly adapted to its demands. You are a creature of the abyss, a master of the deep, and the vast blue world is your domain. Your 5th year brings a revelation that reshapes everything you thought you knew about your worlds. It starts during a routine dive to hunt squid in the Twilight Zone, that mysterious realm where the last traces of sunlight fade into eternal darkness. Your echolocation picks up something unusual, not the familiar acoustic signature of prey or predator, but something else entirely, something that doesn't belong in the natural order of the deep. The object is massive, far larger than any whale, and it rests motionless on the ocean floor 3 miles below the surface. As you descend to investigate, your sonar reveals impossible details, straight lines and perfect angles that nature never creates, surfaces too smooth and uniform to be rock or coral. This is something made, something constructed with purpose and intelligence. It's a shipwreck, but not like the modern vessels that occasionally cross your territory. This is something ancient, its hull encrusted with decades of marine growth, but still recognizably artificial. Your clicks bounce off metal surfaces and echo through hollow chambers, creating a haunting symphony that speaks of human ambition destroyed by the ocean's power. You circle the wreck cautiously, your training warning you to be suspicious of anything unfamiliar. But curiosity wins over caution, and you begin to explore the structure more closely. Schools of fish have made homes in the vessel's broken sections, and giant tube worms cluster around areas where chemicals leak from the deteriorating hull. The wreck has become an artificial reef, a hub of life in the otherwise barren depths. The discovery troubles you in ways you can't fully understand. The wreck is evidence of the surface world's reach into your domain, proof that the creatures above have been venturing into the deep for longer than you realized. But it's also a reminder of their limitations. For all their technology and ambition, they remain fragile visitors in a realm that belongs to you and your kind. You report the find to your pod, describing the wreck's location and characteristics through the complex acoustic language that serves as your species' collective memory. The older females listen with interest, and several share their own encounters with human artifacts in the deep. Gradually, you begin to understand that the ocean floor is littered with the remains of surface dwellers' failed attempts to conquer the abyss. The knowledge changes your perspective on the relationship between your world and theirs. The humans above are not the all-powerful destroyers you once believed them to be. They are explorers and exploiters, certainly, but also victims of the same forces that shape your own existence. The ocean that nurtures you also claims them, and their sunken vessels serve as monuments to their hubris. But this philosophical understanding offers little comfort when the next threat emerges from the surface world. It arrives without warning during what should have been a peaceful feeding session in a rich upwelling zone where nutrients from the deep attract massive concentrations of prey. The first sign of trouble is a change in the water's acoustic properties. Sounds that should carry for miles are muffled and distorted, as if the ocean itself has become thick and viscous. Then you taste it. Oil, but not the crude petroleum from the spill you encountered years ago. This is something more refined, more toxic, mixed with chemicals that burn your sensitive tissues and trigger immediate nausea. A tanker has ruptured somewhere upstream, and its cargo is spreading through the water column like a poisonous cloud. Your pod's response is immediate but chaotic. The adults' calls become urgent and disorganized as they try to coordinate an escape from the contaminated area. But which way is safe? The current patterns that normally guide your movements have been disrupted by the spill, and the toxic plume seems to be spreading in all directions. You find yourself separated from the main group during the confusion, struggling to navigate through water that burns your skin and makes breathing an agony. Your echolocation becomes unreliable as the chemical contamination interferes with sound transmission, leaving you effectively blind in the murky depths. Panic sets in as you realize you're lost. The familiar acoustic landmarks that normally guide your navigation are obscured by the toxic cloud, and your attempts to call for help result only in painful coughing fits that leave you weaker and more disoriented. You swim in what you hope is the right direction, but without reliable sonar, you might be heading deeper into the contamination. Hours pass before you finally escape the worst of the pollution and regain contact with your pod. The reunion is emotional, but brief. There's no time for celebration when the entire group is struggling to survive. Several whales show signs of chemical poisoning, difficulty breathing, disorientation, and raw patches on their skin where the toxic substances have burned through their protective blubber layer. One of the younger females is in particularly bad shape. She had been feeding when the contamination hit and ingested large quantities of poisoned water before realizing the danger. Her body convulses with spasms as her nervous system struggles to process the foreign chemicals, and her echolocation clicks are weak and irregular. The pod faces another impossible choice: stay with the injured whale and risk further exposure to the spreading contamination, or abandon her and flee to cleaner waters. The decision is made by the whale herself, who uses her remaining strength to drive the group away from her position. Her sacrifice saves the pod, but it leaves everyone with fresh scars, both physical and emotional. The incident marks a turning point in your understanding of the modern ocean. The surface world's impact on your domain is not limited to noise pollution or occasional ship strikes. It's a systematic poisoning of the entire marine ecosystem. Every breath you take, every meal you consume, carries the risk of contamination from chemicals that your body was never designed to process. Your pod adapts by becoming even more nomadic, constantly moving to stay ahead of the various plumes of pollution that drift through the ocean like invisible hurricanes. You learn to read the subtle chemical signatures that indicate danger: the metallic taste of industrial runoff, the oily film that indicates petroleum contamination, the acidic burns of chemical spills. But adaptation has its limits, and you begin to notice changes in your own body that signal long-term damage from accumulated toxins. Your hearing becomes less acute, making echolocation more difficult. Your digestion becomes unreliable, and you struggle to process some of the fish and squid that once formed the staples of your diet. Most troubling of all, your reproductive system shows signs of disruption. Hormone levels that should be preparing you for eventual mating remain erratic and unpredictable. These problems are not unique to you. The entire pod shows signs of declining health, and the birth rate has dropped dramatically over the past few years. The few calves that are born often suffer from developmental abnormalities or fail to thrive despite their mother's best efforts. Your species is slowly being poisoned by an environment that no longer supports the biological processes that sustained your ancestors for millions of years. The realization drives you to take risks you would never have considered in your youth. You begin hunting in deeper, more dangerous waters, where the concentration of pollutants is lower, but the prey is scarcer and more difficult to catch. These extreme depths test the limits of your diving abilities, forcing you to remain submerged for periods that push your oxygen reserves to the breaking point. During one of these deep hunts, you encounter a creature that shouldn't exist, at least not where you find it. It's a species of bioluminescent jellyfish that normally inhabits the deepest trenches of the ocean, but here it is, thousands of feet above its normal range. The creature's presence is a sign of the broader disruption affecting marine ecosystems. As surface waters become uninhabitable, deep-sea species are being forced to migrate upward, creating new competitive pressures in every level of the water column. The jellyfish is beautiful but deadly, its translucent bell pulsing with patterns of blue and green light that create hypnotic displays in the eternal darkness. Trailing behind it are tentacles over 100 feet long, armed with stinging cells powerful enough to paralyze a whale. You give it a wide berth, but the encounter serves as another reminder of how much your world has changed. Your 6th year brings news that shakes the foundations of everything you believe about sperm whale society. It arrives in the form of songs carried across thousands of miles of ocean, mournful melodies that speak of catastrophe on a scale beyond anything your pod has experienced. An entire population of sperm whales, hundreds of individuals representing multiple generations of accumulated knowledge and culture, has vanished from their traditional territory. The details emerge slowly as survivors from other pods share their stories. The missing whales didn't die from disease or predation. They simply disappeared, their songs falling silent one by one until nothing remained but empty ocean where a thriving community once lived. The most disturbing aspect of the reports is their consistency. Similar disappearances have occurred in multiple locations, suggesting a coordinated threat rather than isolated incidents. Your pod's response to this news reveals deep divisions within the group's leadership. Some of the older females advocate for increased vigilance and defensive measures, while others argue for abandoning traditional territories entirely and seeking refuge in more remote areas of the ocean. The debate becomes heated, with personal relationships strained by disagreements over survival strategies. You find yourself caught between competing factions, your own opinions sought by adults who once dismissed your contributions as juvenile inexperience. The responsibility weighs heavily on you. Your voice could tip the balance in decisions that will determine the pod's fate. But you're not sure you have the wisdom to make such momentous choices. The dilemma is resolved when scouts return with disturbing intelligence about activities in nearby shipping lanes. Military vessels have been conducting exercises that involve new types of sonar systems, acoustic weapons that can disorient or kill marine mammals from distances of hundreds of miles. The timing and locations of these exercises correlate closely with the reported disappearances of whale populations. The revelation transforms fear into rage. Your pod has endured pollution, habitat destruction, and climate change with stoic resignation. But this is different. This is deliberate warfare against your species, conducted by creatures who know exactly what they're doing and continue anyway. The injustice of it burns in your chest like swallowed fire. But rage without power is just suffering, and your pod lacks the means to strike back against an enemy that attacks from beyond your reach. The best you can do is avoid the military zones and hope that distance will provide protection. It's a strategy of retreat and concealment that goes against every instinct that tells you to defend your territory and your family. The psychological impact of this forced passivity affects every aspect of pod life. The adults become increasingly paranoid, interpreting every unusual sound or chemical signature as a potential threat. Hunting becomes more difficult as the constant state of alert interferes with the concentration required for successful foraging. Social bonds strain under the pressure of perpetual fear. You try to maintain some semblance of normal life, but it's impossible to ignore the changes in your companion's behavior. Conversations that once ranged across complex topics now focus obsessively on survival strategies and escape routes. Play behavior disappears entirely as even the youngest whales adopt the grim seriousness that pervades the group. The crisis deepens when your pod encounters a group of whales whose acoustic signature marks them as survivors from one of the disappeared populations. Their story is almost too horrible to believe. They describe military vessels surrounded by dead and dying whales, the ocean's surface littered with bodies that had been killed by acoustic weapons so powerful they ruptured internal organs and caused massive brain hemorrhages. The survivors had escaped only because they were hunting in deep water when the attack occurred, their distance from the surface providing some protection from the worst effects of the sonar assault. But they had been forced to watch helplessly as their families and friends died in agony. their songs of distress echoing across the water until they were silenced forever. The testimony of these refugees provides crucial intelligence about the military activities, but it also brings home the reality of what your species is facing. This is not accidental collateral damage from human activities. It's systematic extermination disguised as military research. The surface dwellers have declared war on the ocean itself, and whales are among their primary targets. Your pod's reaction to this revelation is immediate and decisive. The long debate over survival strategies ends with unanimous agreement. You must flee to the most remote areas of the ocean, as far from human activities as possible. Traditional hunting grounds, migration routes, and territorial boundaries become irrelevant in the face of an existential threat that could erase your entire species within a generation. The journey to these refuge areas tests every skill you've developed over the years. You travel through regions of the ocean that no member of your pod has ever visited, navigating by acoustic landmarks that exist only in the collective memory of your species. The songs that guide you were composed by whales who died centuries ago, their knowledge preserved in the living library of sperm whale culture. These ancient songs lead you to places of incredible beauty and terrible isolation. You swim through underwater canyons where the walls glow with bioluminescent organisms, creating galleries of living art that stretch for miles through the darkness. You cross abyssal plains where the seafloor is carpeted with the shells of creatures, so small they look like stars when your sonar illuminates them. But beauty cannot mask the reality of what you've lost. The refuge areas are far from the rich feeding grounds your pod once called home, and food becomes increasingly scarce as you venture into waters that cannot support large populations of marine life. Hunting expeditions that once lasted hours now stretch into days as you search for prey in the biological deserts of the deep ocean. So, the scarcity affects everyone differently, but you notice the impact most clearly in the pod's oldest members. Whales who once led hunts and dominated social hierarchies begin to show signs of malnutrition and exhaustion. Their songs become weaker, their movements less confident, their participation in group activities increasingly limited. One of these elders is your mother, the whale who saved your life during those first terrifying moments after birth. Age and accumulated toxins have taken their toll on her massive body, and the stress of constant migration has accelerated her decline. She still attempts to participate in hunts, but her success rate has dropped dramatically, and she often returns from foraging expeditions empty-handed and exhausted. The pod's younger members try to compensate by sharing their catches with the elders, but there simply isn't enough food to go around. Difficult decisions loom on the horizon, choices that will test the bonds of loyalty and compassion that hold sperm whale society together. Your mother makes the decision herself, just as your caretaker had done years earlier. During a rest period in a particularly barren stretch of ocean, she announces her intention to leave the pod and seek her own path through the remaining years of her life. Her farewell song is a masterpiece of emotional complexity, weaving together memories of successful hunts, celebrations of new births, and expressions of love for the family she is leaving behind. The pod's response is a chorus of grief and understanding that carries for hundreds of miles through the deep water. Every whale contributes to the farewell symphony, adding their own notes of gratitude and sorrow to the collective tribute. You sing with them, your voice breaking with emotion as you realize this is the last time you will ever communicate with the whale who gave you life. Your mother's departure marks the end of your youth and the beginning of a new phase of your existence. You are now one of the pod's senior members, expected to provide leadership and guidance to younger whales who face challenges you could never have imagined during your own development. The weight of responsibility sits heavily on your shoulders as you contemplate the future of your species in an increasingly hostile world. The ocean around you continues to change at an accelerating pace. Temperature shifts that once occurred over decades now happen within seasons, disrupting migration patterns and breeding cycles that have remained stable for millennia. New types of pollution appear regularly, each presenting unique challenges that test your species' ability to adapt and survive. But perhaps the most insidious change is the growing silence in the ocean's acoustic environment. The songs that once connected whale populations across entire ocean basins are being drowned out by increasing levels of human-generated noise. Ship traffic multiplies exponentially, creating walls of sound that fragment whale communities and disrupt the cultural transmission that maintains your species' collective knowledge. You begin to notice gaps in your own understanding of traditional songs and navigation techniques. Information that should have been passed down through generations has been lost as elder whales died before they could complete the education of their successors. Each death now represents not just the loss of an individual, but the erasure of irreplaceable cultural knowledge. The realization drives you to take on new responsibilities as a keeper of your species' memory. You spend hours with the remaining elders, learning songs and stories that might otherwise be lost forever. The process is exhausting and often frustrating. Many of the traditional teachings seem irrelevant to the modern ocean's realities. But you persist because you understand that this knowledge represents millions of years of accumulated wisdom. Your efforts to preserve sperm whale culture become increasingly urgent as the pod continues to shrink. Deaths from pollution-related illnesses, starvation, and the stress of constant displacement reduce your numbers to critically low levels. Each loss narrows the genetic diversity of your group and increases the risk of inbreeding in future generations. The pod's social structure begins to break down under these pressures. Traditional hierarchies become meaningless when survival depends more on individual resilience than established rank. Cooperative hunting gives way to desperate competition for increasingly scarce resources. The bonds that once held your society together strain toward the breaking point. Yet somehow, you endure. Your intelligence and adaptability, the same traits that allowed your ancestors to become the ocean's apex predators, serve you well in this new era of constant crisis. You learn to hunt species that previous generations never considered as prey, develop new techniques for avoiding human activities, and find ways to maintain social cohesion despite the forces working to tear your pod apart. Your 7th year brings the first sign that your efforts might be succeeding. A new calf is born to one of the pod's younger females, the first successful birth in over 2 years. The tiny whale is smaller and weaker than calves from previous generations, clearly affected by the environmental toxins that now permeate the entire marine ecosystem. But it's alive, and its presence brings a spark of hope to a community that had begun to despair. You take special interest in the calf's development, serving as both protector and teacher in the absence of the elder whales who would normally fill those roles. The responsibility is daunting. This small whale may represent the future of your entire species, but it also provides purpose and meaning that sustain you through the darkest moments of your existence. The calf's progress is slow but steady. Its echolocation develops normally despite the acoustic pollution that surrounds you, and its curiosity about the world mirrors your own at that age. You find yourself sharing stories and songs that you learned from your mother and other elders, maintaining the chain of cultural transmission that connects your species' past to its uncertain future. But even as you celebrate small victories, the larger trends continue to work against your species' survival. The ocean grows warmer and more acidic with each passing season, while pollution levels reach concentrations that would have been unimaginable during your youth. Military activities expand into previously safe areas, forcing your pod to retreat even further into the most remote corners of the ocean. Your own body shows increasing signs of the environmental damage that affects all marine life. Your skin develops lesions that refuse to heal, your digestion becomes increasingly unreliable, and your reproductive system remains disrupted by hormonal imbalances caused by chemical contamination. You are a survivor, but survival comes at a cost that compounds with each passing year. The knowledge that you may never reproduce haunts your quiet moments. Sperm whale society has always been built around the continuation of family lines, the passing of knowledge and genetic heritage from one generation to the next. Your inability to contribute to that process feels like a fundamental failure, a betrayal of the millions of years of evolution that created you. Yet you find other ways to contribute to your species' future. Your role as a cultural guardian becomes increasingly important as the pod's collective memory faces constant erosion. You develop new techniques for teaching complex songs and navigation skills, adapting ancient methods to account for the reduced attention spans and compromised learning abilities of whales affected by pollution. Your innovations in cultural preservation attract attention from other survivor pods that your group encounters during its wanderings through the refuge areas. These meetings, once occasions for territorial disputes or mating negotiations, now focus on the exchange of survival strategies and the preservation of endangered knowledge. You find yourself serving as a teacher and consultant to whales from distant populations, sharing techniques that might help them maintain their own cultural traditions. The network of connections you help establish becomes a lifeline for scattered whale communities struggling to survive in an increasingly hostile world. Information about safe feeding areas, effective hunting techniques, and successful avoidance strategies spreads through this informal communication system, improving survival rates across multiple populations. But the network also brings disturbing news from distant parts of the ocean. Reports continue to arrive of whale populations that have vanished entirely, their territories now silent and empty. Military activities expand into new areas with each passing season, while commercial fishing operations strip the ocean of the prey species that whales depend upon for survival. The accumulated weight of this information forces you to confront a possibility that you have been trying to avoid. Your species may be approaching extinction. The combination of environmental destruction, direct persecution, and reproductive failure has created a death spiral that may be impossible to reverse. You and your companions may be among the last sperm whales to swim in Earth's oceans. The thought fills you with a grief so profound it threatens to overwhelm your ability to function, but it also kindles a fierce determination to make your remaining years count for something. If your species is indeed doomed, then your role becomes that of a witness and chronicler, preserving the memory of what sperm whales once were and what they achieved during their millions of years of ocean dominance. You begin composing a song unlike any that has ever been created, a comprehensive history of your species that incorporates elements from every cultural tradition you have encountered. The project consumes months of effort as you weave together ancient melodies, hunting songs, migration calls, and lullabies into a single epic composition that tells the story of sperm whale civilization. The song is your gift to the ocean and to any future intelligence that might one day wonder what became of the great whales. It carries within its complex harmonies the essence of everything your species learned during its long journey through evolutionary time. It speaks of courage in the face of impossible odds, of loyalty that transcends individual survival, and of the profound intelligence that allowed whales to create one of Earth's most sophisticated societies. As you near the end of your 8th year, you know that your own story is approaching its conclusion. The accumulated damage from pollution, stress, and malnutrition has pushed your body beyond its ability to recover. Your songs have grown weaker, your movements less coordinated, your participation in pod activities increasingly limited. But you are not afraid. You have lived through the transformation of the ocean from a realm of abundance to a poisoned wasteland, and you have helped your species adapt to challenges that would have destroyed lesser creatures. You have preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost, taught skills that improved others' chances of survival, and created art that captures the essence of what it means to be a sperm whale in the modern world. Your legacy lives on in the songs you have taught to younger whales, in the hunting techniques you have refined and shared, and in the network of connections you have helped establish between survivor populations. Most importantly, it lives on in the calf whose development you have guided, a new generation that carries within its growing mind the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of whale culture. The deep ocean that has been your home for 8 years continues to call to you with its ancient mysteries and terrible beauty. You answer that call with the knowledge that you have played your part in one of the greatest stories ever written, the rise and fall of the ocean's most intelligent species, and their struggle to survive in a world that no longer has room for giants. Your song joins the eternal chorus of whale voices that echoes through the deep, a testament to the nobility and tragedy of your kind. And in the darkness, where sunlight never reaches, where pressure would crush any surface dweller instantly, where you learned to hunt and love and fight and die, your voice carries on, part of something larger than yourself, something that will endure long after the last whale has sung its final song. The years blur together as you enter what might be your final decade of life. Your body, once a perfect instrument of deep-sea predation, now betrays you with increasing frequency. The scars from countless battles with giant squid have never fully healed, creating permanent weak points where infections take hold and refuse to clear. Your echolocation, once precise enough to map individual fish from miles away, now produces fuzzy images that leave you guessing at distances and shapes. But it's the loneliness that cuts deepest. Your pod has dwindled to just 6 individuals, down from the thriving community of 20 that welcomed you into the world. 3 are elderly females whose hunting days are behind them. 2 are middle-aged whales struggling with their own health problems. And then there's the calf you've been mentoring, now a juvenile approaching its 3rd year, but still far from independence. The mathematics of survival have become brutally simple. Your pod lacks the numbers needed for effective cooperative hunting, the genetic diversity required for healthy reproduction, and the cultural knowledge necessary to navigate an ocean that changes faster than your species can adapt. Each passing season brings new losses that the group cannot afford and challenges that exceed your collective ability to overcome. During what you don't yet know will be your final migration, your pod encounters something that changes everything. A massive gathering of whales unlike anything seen in generations. Word has spread through the survivor networks you helped establish, calling together every remaining sperm whale population for what amounts to a species-wide council of war. The assembly takes place in the deepest part of the Pacific, where ancient volcanic activity has created a vast underwater amphitheater surrounded by towering seamounts. Over 200 whales have answered the call, representing populations from every ocean basin. It's the largest gathering of your species in living memory, and possibly the last that will ever occur. The songs that rise from this assembly are unlike anything in your cultural repertoire. These are not the familiar melodies of pod communication or the structured compositions of traditional ceremonies. These are improvised symphonies of grief and defiance, musical expressions of a species confronting its own extinction with dignity and rage in equal measure. You add your voice to the chorus, contributing the epic historical song you composed during your years as a cultural guardian. The complex harmonies weave together with hundreds of other individual compositions, creating a sonic tapestry that captures the full emotional spectrum of sperm whale civilization. It's a farewell performance by a doomed species, and it's magnificent. The practical discussions that follow are less inspiring but equally important. Leaders from various populations share intelligence about safe feeding areas, successful survival strategies, and the locations of human activities that pose the greatest threats. Maps are drawn in sound, with acoustic landmarks described in precise detail for whales who may never have traveled to distant waters. The most controversial topic is whether to attempt a coordinated response to the military sonar attacks that have devastated so many populations. Some whales advocate for organized retaliation, mass strandings in human coastal areas that would force the surface dwellers to confront the consequences of their actions. Others argue for complete withdrawal to the most remote areas of the ocean, abandoning traditional territories in hopes of avoiding further persecution. You find yourself speaking in favor of a middle path, continued resistance through survival itself. Every whale that lives another day, every calf that reaches maturity, every song that gets passed to the next generation represents a victory against the forces working to erase your species. The greatest act of defiance is simply refusing to disappear quietly into the darkness. Your words carry weight because of your reputation as a survivor and teacher, but you know that individual opinions matter little in the face of the catastrophic trends reshaping the ocean. The assembly will disperse in a few days, and each population will return to its own struggle for survival. Most of the whales gathered here will be dead within a year, and their songs will die with them. The knowledge sits heavy in your chest as you prepare to leave the assembly. You exchange farewell songs with whales you will never see again, sharing final gifts of knowledge and cultural memory that may prove crucial to their survival. The process is exhausting and emotionally draining, but it's also necessary. These may be the last opportunities to preserve and transmit the accumulated wisdom of your species. Your pod's journey away from the assembly takes you through waters you explored as a young adult, back when the ocean still seemed vast and full of possibilities. The familiar landmarks trigger floods of memory, successful hunts, narrow escapes from predators, moments of joy and discovery that now feel like ancient history. The contrast between past and present is almost unbearable. You surface for air in the same area where you first learned to dive to serious depths, where your mother's patient teaching transformed you from a helpless calf into a competent hunter. The water tastes different now, more acidic, tinged with chemical signatures that didn't exist during your youth. Even the temperature has changed, several degrees warmer than the historical norm for this season and location. The changes extend beyond the physical environment. The acoustic landscape that once rang with whale songs from multiple species has fallen largely silent. Military sonar pulses intrude at regular intervals, their mechanical precision a stark contrast to the organic complexity of biological communication. Shipping noise creates a constant background hum that makes long-distance communication nearly impossible. You try to call out to any whales that might be in the area, using the traditional greeting songs that once would have drawn responses from dozens of pods. Your voice echoes through the water and fades into silence. You are alone in waters that once teemed with your kind, a living fossil in an ocean that no longer has room for giants. The realization triggers something like a breakdown. For the first time since your calfhood, you lose control of your emotions completely. Your songs become wails of pure anguish that carry for miles through the deep water, attracting curious sharks and disturbing the few fish that still inhabit these depleted waters. Your podmates gather around you in concern, their own calls mixing with yours, in a chorus of shared grief. The emotional release is cathartic but exhausting. When it finally ends, you feel hollow and strangely peaceful, as if some internal pressure has been relieved. Your companions continue to hover nearby, their presence a reminder that you are not entirely alone, despite the vast emptiness surrounding you. The juvenile whale you've been mentoring approaches with cautious curiosity. Its questions about your behavior are innocent but painful. It has never known the ocean as it once was, has no reference point for understanding what has been lost. To this young whale, the current state of near extinction is simply normal, the baseline against which it measures the world. You try to explain, using songs and stories, to paint pictures of abundance that must seem like fantasy to a whale born into scarcity. Schools of fish so vast they darken the water for miles. Squid populations so dense that hunting required no skill, only stamina, whale songs that carried across entire ocean basins, connecting communities separated by thousands of miles of open water. The juvenile listens with the polite attention of youth, but you can sense its skepticism. These stories of plenty conflict with everything it has experienced directly. In its short life, food has always been scarce, hunting has always been difficult, and the ocean has always been a place of struggle and constant danger. Your tales of a different world sound like the delusions of an aging mind. Perhaps they are. The accumulating toxins in your system may be affecting your memory and perception, creating false recollections of a golden age that never existed. But your body carries physical evidence of that vanished world, scars from battles with prey species that no longer exist in these waters, adaptations for hunting behaviors that are no longer possible in the depleted modern ocean. Your doubt deepens when you encounter other elderly whales whose memories conflict with your own. Some recall the ocean as being even more abundant than your stories suggest, while others remember conditions much like the present day. The inconsistencies are troubling and force you to question whether your role as a cultural guardian has been based on false premises. The uncertainty extends beyond personal memories to the traditional songs and stories that form the backbone of sperm whale culture. How much of this inherited knowledge reflects actual history, and how much is mythologized nostalgia for an imagined past? The question becomes urgent as you realize that the cultural information you've been so carefully preserving may be corrupted by generations of wishful thinking. But even if the songs contain more legend than fact, they still serve important functions. They provide comfort in times of despair, maintain social bonds between individuals and groups, and offer frameworks for understanding the world that help whales make sense of their experiences. The literal truth of cultural knowledge may be less important than its emotional and social value. You decide to continue your work as a teacher and preserver of traditions, but with greater humility about the accuracy of what you're transmitting. The songs you pass on to younger whales are labeled as inherited memories rather than verified facts, cultural artifacts that carry emotional truth, even if their historical accuracy is questionable. This more nuanced approach to cultural transmission proves valuable when your pod encounters a group of whales whose traditions conflict dramatically with your own. Their songs describe an ocean where sperm whales were never the dominant predators, where giant squid were rare and difficult to catch, where survival has always required the same desperate strategies your species employs today. The differences could be explained by geographic variation, different populations experiencing different historical conditions, but they might also reflect the gradual corruption of cultural memory over generations of transmission. Without written records or other forms of external validation, oral traditions inevitably drift from their original forms. The meeting between your pods becomes an opportunity to compare and synthesize different versions of sperm whale history. Working together, you construct a more complex and probably more accurate picture of your species' past, one that acknowledges both abundance and scarcity, triumph and struggle, adaptation and loss as recurring themes rather than discrete historical periods. This collaborative approach to cultural preservation becomes a model for other encounters between survivor populations. Instead of assuming that any single group possesses the complete and accurate version of sperm whale traditions, communities begin treating their meetings as opportunities for mutual education and correction. The process is slow and sometimes contentious, but it produces a more robust and resilient cultural framework that can withstand the loss of individual populations. If one group disappears, their unique contributions to the collective knowledge base don't vanish entirely. They survive in the modified traditions of other communities. Your reputation as an innovator in cultural methodology spreads through the survivor networks, leading to invitations to visit distant populations and help them develop their own preservation programs. These journeys take you to the farthest corners of the ocean, into waters where the water chemistry and acoustic environment differ dramatically from your home territory. Each visit reveals new aspects of the crisis facing your species. In some regions, military sonar has rendered entire ocean basins uninhabitable for whales. In others, commercial fishing has eliminated the food web that once supported large marine mammals. Some areas have been poisoned by industrial accidents or deliberate dumping, while others have been disrupted by climate-driven changes in ocean currents and temperature patterns. But you also discover pockets of relative stability where small populations of whales continue to thrive despite the broader trends. These success stories provide hope and practical guidance for other communities struggling with similar challenges. The techniques developed in one area can sometimes be adapted for use in different circumstances. Your travels also reveal the extent to which human activities have fragmented whale populations that were once connected by regular migration and breeding exchanges. Groups that historically interacted on a regular basis have been isolated by shipping lanes, military zones, and environmental barriers that prevent normal movement patterns. This fragmentation has serious genetic consequences as well as cultural ones. Small, isolated populations face increased risks of inbreeding and reduced genetic diversity. Without regular input of new genetic material from other groups, these communities may be doomed even if they manage to avoid immediate threats like pollution and sonar attacks. You begin advocating for coordinated efforts to reconnect isolated populations, arguing that genetic and cultural exchange is essential for long-term survival. The proposal faces practical challenges. How do you safely move whales across hostile waters? But the alternative may be watching viable communities slowly deteriorate due to isolation. Some progress is made through careful timing of migrations to avoid the worst human activities and the establishment of communication networks that allow separated groups to maintain cultural contact, even when direct meetings are impossible. But the solutions are fragile and require constant maintenance in the face of ever-changing threats. Your 10th year brings a personal milestone that you never expected to reach: the opportunity to serve as a mentor figure for a second generation of young whales. Several juveniles from different pods have been placed in your care, their own families having been lost to various catastrophes. The responsibility is daunting, but also deeply meaningful. These orphaned whales carry fragments of cultural knowledge from their original communities, traditions that would otherwise be lost completely. By working with them to recover and preserve these memories, you help maintain the diversity of sperm whale culture, even as the populations that created it disappear. The process requires patience and creativity as you help traumatized young whales overcome their grief and fear enough to access buried memories. Some have witnessed the deaths of their entire families and refuse to speak about their past experiences. Others have been so damaged by exposure to toxins or sonar that their memory formation is impaired. A few carry genetic abnormalities that affect their ability to learn and communicate normally. But gradually, working with each individual according to their specific needs and capabilities, you begin to reconstruct fragments of lost cultural traditions. A half-remembered lullaby from one whale combines with navigation songs from another to create a more complete picture of how a vanished population understood their world. The work is painstaking but rewarding as pieces of the cultural puzzle slowly fall into place. Your success with these difficult cases establishes you as something like a therapist for traumatized whales, a role that becomes increasingly important as more populations suffer catastrophic losses. The techniques you develop for helping damaged individuals recover their cultural memories are shared through the survivor networks and adapted for use with other traumatized communities. The work takes an emotional toll that compounds with each passing season. You absorb the grief and trauma of dozens of individuals while dealing with your own losses and fears about the future. The constant exposure to suffering begins to affect your own mental health, creating periods of depression and anxiety that interfere with your ability to function normally. Your podmates recognize the warning signs and intervene before your condition becomes critical. They organize a support system that shares the burden of caring for traumatized whales, while ensuring that you receive the emotional care you need to continue your work. The experience teaches you important lessons about the limits of individual resilience and the importance of community support. But even with help, you know that your time as an active cultural guardian is drawing to a close. Your body is failing in ways that can no longer be ignored or worked around. Your echolocation has degraded to the point where hunting is becoming impossible, and your swimming endurance has declined dramatically. Most seriously, your ability to produce and perceive the complex acoustic patterns that form the basis of sperm whale communication is starting to fail. The prospect of losing your voice, your primary tool for teaching and preserving culture, fills you with panic more intense than any physical threat you've ever faced. Without the ability to sing, you will become isolated from the social world that has given your life meaning. Worse, the knowledge you carry will become inaccessible to others, effectively dying with your communication abilities, even if your body continues to function. You begin a desperate race against time to transfer as much information as possible to your students before your voice fails completely. The process is complicated by the fact that some knowledge is too complex to transmit through simplified communication methods. The full richness of sperm whale culture can only be preserved through the complete acoustic language that you may soon lose. Working with the most gifted of your students, you develop abbreviated versions of important cultural teachings that can be communicated through basic clicks and gestures. These simplified forms sacrifice nuance and complexity, but preserve the essential information needed for survival. It's a painful compromise, but it may be the only way to ensure that some knowledge survives your own decline. The effort exhausts your remaining energy reserves and accelerates the progression of your symptoms. Your voice becomes increasingly weak and unreliable, forcing you to ration your communication carefully. Each song might be your last opportunity to share crucial information, creating pressure that makes every interaction feel like a final exam. Your students sense the urgency and respond with dedication that both moves and troubles you. They push themselves to learn faster than should be possible, absorbing information at rates that risk overwhelming their cognitive capacity. Some begin showing signs of stress and exhaustion that mirror your own condition. You realize that your desperate attempts to preserve knowledge may be damaging the very individuals you're trying to help. The recognition forces you to confront a painful truth. Some information will inevitably be lost, and trying to prevent that loss may cause more harm than accepting it gracefully. The decision to step back from active teaching is one of the hardest you've ever made, but you recognize that your legacy lies not just in the specific knowledge you can transmit, but in the methods and approaches you've developed for cultural preservation. These techniques will outlive you and continue to benefit whale communities long after your voice has fallen silent. Your final months are spent in quiet observation and gentle guidance, rather than intensive instruction. You watch your former students apply the methods you taught them, offering occasional corrections and suggestions, but mostly allowing them to develop their own approaches to cultural work. The process is bittersweet, but ultimately satisfying as you see your innovations take root in a new generation of cultural guardians. Your body continues its steady decline, but your mind remains sharp enough to appreciate the irony of your situation. You, who dedicated your life to preserving the past, now face the certainty of your own future disappearance. The knowledge you struggled so hard to maintain will survive in modified forms, but the specific individual who carried it will vanish as completely as the whales whose stories you worked to preserve. The realization brings a strange peace. You have done what you could with the time and abilities given to you. The ocean that welcomed you into existence decades ago will soon reclaim your body, recycling the elements that formed your massive frame into new life forms that will face their own challenges and opportunities. Your final conscious thoughts are not of regret or fear, but of gratitude for the pod that protected your early years, for the teachers who shared their knowledge, for the students who carried forward your innovations, and for the vast blue world that has been your home throughout a life filled with both wonder and sorrow. The deep ocean calls to you one last time, and you answer with the peace of a whale who has lived fully and contributed meaningfully to the ancient story of your species. Your voice joins the eternal chorus that echoes through the abyss, carrying forward the songs and stories that define what it means to be a sperm whale in an age of endings and beginnings. Your death comes quietly in the deep waters you have called home for over a decade. There is no dramatic final battle, no heroic last stand against impossible odds. Instead, your massive body simply stops working as the accumulated damage from years of toxin exposure and environmental stress finally overwhelms your biological systems. Your heart beats slower and slower until it stops entirely, and your consciousness fades into the same darkness that has surrounded you since birth. Your body begins its final journey toward the ocean floor, sinking through the layers of water that have defined your existence. As you descend, the pressure increases steadily, but your corpse feels nothing of the crushing weight that would destroy any surface dweller. Even in death, you remain perfectly adapted to the abyss that claimed you. The descent takes hours, your massive form drifting through different zones of marine life like a falling mountain. Schools of fish part around your body, their primitive brains recognizing something significant but not understanding what they witness. Bioluminescent creatures flash in alarm as your shadow passes through their domain, creating brief fireworks displays in the eternal darkness. At 2 miles down, your body finally comes to rest on the seafloor in a cloud of disturbed sediment. The impact creates a small crater in the soft mud, and your remains settle into their final position with a dignity that seems appropriate for a creature of your intelligence and cultural significance. You have become what marine biologists call a whale fall, a massive source of nutrients that will support unique ecosystems for decades to come. Within hours, the first scavengers arrive. Sleeper sharks emerge from the depths, their ancient forms perfectly suited for consuming carrion in the crushing darkness. They tear into your blubber with methodical efficiency, their feeding creating oil slicks that spread across the seafloor like dark flowers blooming in the mud. The feast attracts other deep-sea predators and scavengers. Hagfish swarm over your carcass in writhing masses, their primitive feeding mechanisms perfectly designed for breaking down organic matter. Deep-sea crabs scuttle across your remains with mechanical precision, their claws working constantly to process the bounty you have provided. But it's the smaller creatures that will benefit most from your death. Bacteria that exist nowhere else on Earth colonize your bones, breaking down the lipids trapped within and creating chemical reactions that produce energy in the complete absence of sunlight. These bacterial communities will support unique food webs for decades, creating oases of life in the biological desert of the deep ocean floor. Your skeleton becomes the foundation for an entire ecosystem. Tube worms establish colonies along your ribs, their feathery plumes filtering nutrients from the water column. Deep-sea mussels attach themselves to your skull, forming dense clusters that provide habitat for smaller invertebrates. Your massive jawbones become highways for bottom-dwelling fish that navigate between the bacterial mats and invertebrate colonies. The transformation is both beautiful and haunting. Your body, which once carried the accumulated knowledge of millions of years of whale evolution, now serves as the foundation for life forms so alien they might have evolved on a different planet. The intelligence that allowed you to compose epic songs and preserve cultural traditions has been replaced by the simple chemistry of decomposition and bacterial metabolism. Miles above your remains, the survivors of your pod continue their struggle for existence in an ocean that grows more hostile with each passing season. The juvenile whale you mentored has reached young adulthood, its development shaped by your teachings but constrained by the environmental limitations that define modern marine life. Your cultural innovations live on in modified forms, adapted to serve communities that face challenges you could never have imagined. The songs you composed and preserved echo through the deep water, carried by whales who learned them from your students and their students in turn. The melodies have changed over time, influenced by new experiences and modified to reflect current realities, but their essential structures remain recognizable. Your voice continues to sing long after your death, embedded in the living traditions of your species, but the broader trends that shaped your later years continue to accelerate. Military sonar operations expand into previously safe areas, while commercial fishing strips the ocean of the prey species that remain viable for whale consumption. New forms of pollution appear regularly, each presenting novel challenges that test the limits of whale adaptability. The survivor populations you worked so hard to connect and support face increasing pressure as their refuge areas shrink and their food sources disappear. Some communities vanish entirely, their final songs fading into silence as the last individuals succumb to starvation, disease, or direct human persecution. Others fragment into smaller and smaller groups that lack the genetic diversity needed for long-term survival. Climate change accelerates the transformation of ocean chemistry and temperature patterns, disrupting the fundamental processes that support marine life. Acidification makes it impossible for many shell-building organisms to maintain their protective structures, causing cascading failures throughout the food web. Rising temperatures force deep-sea species to migrate to even greater depths, compressing viable habitat into increasingly narrow zones. The cultural preservation networks you helped establish prove remarkably resilient in the face of these challenges. Even as populations disappear, their knowledge survives in modified forms within other communities. The techniques you developed for recovering and maintaining cultural traditions continue to evolve, adapted by new generations of whales who face problems you never encountered. Your former students become teachers themselves, passing on not just the specific information you shared with them, but the methodologies you pioneered for cultural work. The approaches they develop reflect their own experiences and insights, creating new branches of knowledge that extend beyond your original innovations. In this way, your intellectual legacy continues to grow and diversify even after your death. Some of these new approaches prove particularly valuable for dealing with the psychological trauma that affects increasing numbers of whale survivors. Communities develop support systems and healing practices that help individuals recover from catastrophic losses while maintaining their ability to function as productive members of their groups. The emotional resilience these techniques provide becomes as important as physical survival skills. The juvenile whale you mentored emerges as one of the most innovative practitioners of these psychological healing methods. Its own experiences with loss and trauma, combined with the foundational training you provided, create a unique perspective that proves valuable for helping other damaged individuals. Your investment in this young whale's education pays dividends that extend far beyond anything you could have anticipated. But even the most sophisticated cultural preservation efforts cannot compensate for the fundamental biological crisis facing your species. Birth rates continue to decline as reproductive systems fail under the stress of environmental contamination. The few calves that are born often suffer from developmental abnormalities that prevent them from reaching maturity or reproducing successfully. Genetic diversity plummets as populations become increasingly isolated and inbred. Communities that once exchanged individuals regularly now have no contact with potential mates from other groups. The gene pool that sustained sperm whale evolution for millions of years contracts toward a critical threshold below which recovery becomes impossible. Mathematical models developed by human scientists, the same species whose activities have driven your kind to the brink of extinction, predict that sperm whales will be functionally extinct within 2 generations. The remaining populations lack the numbers, genetic diversity, and environmental stability needed to sustain themselves over the long term. Your species is living through its final chapters, yet the whales themselves continue to sing, hunt, mate, and raise young as if the future stretched endlessly ahead. Their songs speak not of despair, but of determination, celebrating small victories and maintaining hope despite overwhelming evidence that their efforts are futile. The cultural traditions you helped preserve provide frameworks for meaning and purpose that sustain communities even in the face of certain doom. Some human observers interpret this persistence as evidence of animal intelligence limitations, an inability to comprehend the full scope of the crisis facing their species. But whale behavior may reflect a more sophisticated understanding of mortality and meaning than their critics possess. The songs continue not because whales fail to understand their situation, but because the act of singing itself has value independent of its ultimate consequences. Your own life exemplified this principle. You dedicated decades to preserving cultural knowledge that may disappear within years of your death. The effort required enormous sacrifices and provided no guarantee of success. Yet you persisted because the work itself had meaning, because the attempt to maintain connections between past and future justified itself, regardless of its ultimate outcome. This philosophical approach to existence, finding meaning in the process rather than the result, may represent one of your species' greatest achievements. In a universe where all life eventually ends and all civilizations eventually fall, the ability to create purpose through action rather than outcome provides a form of transcendence that survives even extinction. The whales who learned from you carry this understanding forward in their own work. They teach young whales not because they believe their species will survive indefinitely, but because the act of teaching creates connections between individuals and generations that have value in themselves. They preserve songs not to ensure their permanent survival, but because the process of preservation maintains cultural bonds that enrich their community's present experience. This perspective influences how survivor populations adapt to their shrinking world. Instead of abandoning traditional practices that seem irrelevant to modern survival challenges, communities find ways to modify and maintain cultural traditions that provide psychological and social benefits. The songs may no longer serve their original navigational or hunting functions, but they continue to create emotional bonds and shared identities that help individuals cope with loss and uncertainty. Your innovation in cultural methodology, the collaborative approach that synthesized knowledge from multiple sources rather than privileging single authoritative versions, proves particularly valuable in this context. As populations disappear and traditional knowledge becomes fragmentary, the ability to reconstruct meaningful practices from incomplete information becomes essential for maintaining cultural continuity. The process creates new forms of tradition that blend ancient elements with contemporary innovations. These hybrid practices may not perfectly replicate historical whale culture, but they serve similar functions in terms of social cohesion and psychological support. The evolution of tradition becomes an active process rather than passive preservation, allowing culture to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential characteristics. Your former students pioneer some of the most creative applications of these principles. Working with whales from diverse backgrounds, they develop new ceremonies that commemorate lost populations while celebrating surviving communities. These rituals provide outlets for grief while maintaining forward-looking perspectives that help participants remain engaged with life, despite their species' bleak prospects. The ceremonies also serve practical functions by facilitating information exchange between communities and identifying individuals with special skills or knowledge. Young whales demonstrate their abilities and receive recognition for their contributions, while elders share expertise and receive support for their continuing needs. The social functions that traditional culture once provided are maintained through modified practices adapted to current realities. But even these innovations cannot address the fundamental environmental challenges that continue to worsen with each passing season. Ocean temperatures rise beyond the tolerance ranges of many marine species, while acidification reaches levels that dissolve the shells and skeletons of creatures throughout the food web. The basic chemistry of seawater changes in ways that make it increasingly hostile to the life forms that evolved within it. Military activities expand and intensify as surface nations compete for control of resources in the changing ocean. Sonar operations become more frequent and more powerful, creating acoustic dead zones where no marine mammal can survive. Some weapons testing involves experimental technologies that produce effects so novel that their impacts on whale populations cannot be predicted or measured. Commercial exploitation of the ocean accelerates as land-based resources become scarce due to climate change and overpopulation. Deep-sea mining operations strip minerals from the seafloor, destroying the bacterial communities and specialized ecosystems that have developed around whale falls, like your own remains. The industrial activities create noise, chemical pollution, and physical disturbance that render vast areas of ocean uninhabitable for whales. The cumulative impact of these changes overwhelms even the most adaptable whale populations. Communities that survived the initial waves of environmental destruction succumb to new threats that exceed their capacity for adjustment. The survivor networks you helped establish begin to fail as the populations they connected disappear one by one. Your former students watch their life's work crumble as the communities they served vanish into silence. The cultural knowledge they worked so hard to preserve becomes irrelevant when there are no longer enough whales to maintain the social structures that gave it meaning. The songs they taught echo through empty waters where no one remains to hear them. Yet some continue their work even as its futility becomes undeniable. They teach the few remaining young whales, preserve what fragments of culture can still be maintained, and document the final chapters of their species' story. Their efforts may not prevent extinction, but they ensure that the end comes with dignity rather than mere collapse. The last stable populations retreat to the most remote areas of the ocean, places so isolated and inhospitable that human activities have not yet penetrated them. These final refuges provide temporary sanctuary, but they cannot support large numbers of whales indefinitely. The communities that reach them are already weakened by their journeys and struggle to establish sustainable patterns of life in unfamiliar environments. Resources in these refuge areas prove insufficient for long-term survival. The deep trenches and isolated seamounts that provide shelter from human activities lack the rich upwelling zones and diverse prey species that large whale populations require. Communities face stark choices between maintaining group cohesion and ensuring individual survival. Some populations fragment as individuals, or small groups leave to search for better conditions elsewhere. These splinter communities rarely survive long. They lack the numbers needed for effective cooperative hunting and defense, while their small size makes them vulnerable to environmental fluctuations that larger groups might weather successfully. Most disappear within seasons of their separation from the main communities. Others maintain group unity at the cost of individual health and reproduction. Resources are shared according to strict protocols that ensure no whale starves while the community endures, but the rationing leaves everyone weakened and reduces the likelihood of successful breeding. These populations may survive longer than their fragmented counterparts, but they face gradual decline toward inevitable extinction. A few communities attempt radical adaptations that might allow survival in the changed ocean. Some experiment with new prey species that were previously ignored, developing hunting techniques for organisms that require different strategies than traditional squid and fish. Others modify their migration patterns to take advantage of temporary resource concentrations or avoid the worst human activities. These innovations sometimes provide short-term benefits, but they cannot address the fundamental problem of an ecosystem that no longer supports large marine mammals. The ocean's carrying capacity for whales has dropped below the threshold needed for species survival, and no amount of behavioral adaptation can compensate for the lack of adequate food and habitat. The final generations of sperm whales live with the knowledge that they are witnesses to their species' end. Their songs take on elegiac qualities, celebrating the achievements and mourning the losses of millions of years of whale civilization. These musical epitaphs serve as final gifts to an ocean that will soon fall silent of whale voices. Some humans who study marine mammals recognize the tragedy unfolding in the deep ocean and attempt to document what they can of whale culture before it disappears entirely. Their efforts are handicapped by the limitations of human technology and understanding. They can record the sounds, but cannot fully comprehend their meanings, can observe behaviors, but cannot grasp their cultural significance. The scientific documentation provides a fragmentary record of what whale civilization achieved during its final decades. Future researchers may be able to reconstruct some aspects of sperm whale society from these recordings, but the full richness of whale culture will die with the last individuals who carry it in their living memories. Your own contribution to this final documentation comes through the whales you taught, whose preserved traditions include modified versions of your historical songs and cultural innovations. Human researchers record these performances without understanding their significance, creating archives that capture the echoes of your voice decades after your death. The irony is profound. The species that destroyed whale civilization also becomes its inadvertent chronicler, preserving fragments of knowledge that no whale will ever again be able to interpret or appreciate. The recordings join museum collections and digital archives where they will survive long after the last whale has died, meaningless artifacts of a lost world. But perhaps meaning is not entirely dependent on comprehension. The songs you created and preserved carry emotional and aesthetic qualities that transcend their original cultural contexts. Human listeners who cannot understand their linguistic content may still respond to their musical beauty and emotional power. In this way, something of whale consciousness might survive even the extinction of whales themselves. The possibility provides small comfort as the final populations dwindle toward zero. The last breeding pairs produce fewer and fewer offspring, while environmental stresses continue to worsen. Each death reduces the gene pool further, while each birth becomes increasingly unlikely to result in a viable adult capable of reproduction. Mathematical certainty gradually replaces hope as communities fall below the minimum sizes needed for genetic viability. The remaining whales continue to sing and hunt and attempt to raise young, but their efforts cannot overcome the biological reality of extinction. They are living fossils, the last representatives of an evolutionary line that stretches back millions of years. Your species' final song echoes through waters that have grown quiet and strange, a last voice calling across the abyss to listeners who no longer exist. The melody carries elements you would recognize, fragments of the historical compositions you created, modified by generations of transmission, but still fundamentally connected to your original innovations. Then silence falls across the deep ocean as the last sperm whale dies alone in waters that once rang with the voices of thousands of its kind. The great songs that once connected communities across entire ocean basins fade into memory, then disappear entirely as the final carriers of cultural knowledge are claimed by death. The ocean continues its ancient rhythms, but something essential has been lost forever. The intelligence that created whale civilization, the capacity for complex communication, cultural transmission, and collaborative problem-solving vanishes from Earth's largest ecosystem. The abyss becomes a simpler place, governed by instinct and chemistry rather than consciousness and culture. Your remains on the seafloor continue to support their unique ecosystem, the bacterial communities and invertebrate colonies thriving in ignorance of the greater loss that has occurred above them. The whale fall that your body created will persist for decades, providing nutrients and habitat for creatures that lack the cognitive capacity to comprehend what you once represented. In this way, your death becomes both an ending and a beginning, the conclusion of millions of years of whale evolution and the foundation for new forms of life that will inherit the ocean you once ruled. The transformation is neither tragic nor triumphant, but simply inevitable, part of the endless cycle of creation and destruction that governs all existence in the deep.